So, what happens when we die? What really happens to the soul at that moment of death that we experience as a life review? Hi, I'm Kedrick Olson. I have lived a paranormal life. I grew up with spirits and with hauntings, going to seances. I've had a lifetime of working with disembodied entities that I call the whisperers. They're like guides, teachers that gave me insights to the paranormal realms, to subtle beings, and how to work with things. More importantly, they taught me some things about the moment of death and what happens when we die. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You see here, we hear so much about the point of death that when a person dies and they come back a little bit, they'll talk a bit about they're experiencing their life review, or they'll say that they saw their life flashing before their eyes. And in a lot of the studies about near death experiences, there have been some really striking similarities between the cases. People talk about seeing a tunnel, or they're being greeted by loved ones who've died. And more importantly, they get that life review. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, in order to better understand what's going on with this life review, we need to know a bit more about the differences between the brain and the soul, how they're connected, and more importantly, we actually need to talk a little bit about what time is and how time flows. You see, when we've got our brain and when we're in our body, we experience time flowing in one direction at a single speed rather than like simultaneously occurring, which is really an interesting concept for us to really perceive, because the brain needs to see things in a linear cause effect order. But a lot of the studies coming to us from quantum theory and quantum science shows that all of time is occurring at the same moment, but there are these multiple layers of possibility and probability. And these collapse into actuality by our observation of them. And maybe later on I'll put together a video that will explain more of that. But just for now, just remember that time is not a stream, but a continuous state of existence. But the brain doesn't work that way. It needs to experience linear events. Effect always has to follow cause, and cause always has to precede effect. Our life can be thought of as the experience of a single line of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. But all those studies in the universe doesn't really work that way. But our brains interpret that information of time as a single linear flow in a single direction. So the linearity of time is just an illusion. It doesn't really work that way, but our brain needs it to have that way. Now, when we talk about the soul, it's important to know that the soul is not bound by such linear experiences. The soul can actually experience time as a continuous existence, and we're going to call that a continuum. So when the soul is no longer bound by the limitations of the brain, when it finally gets out of the body, it can experience all of those layers of probability and possibility. It can move forward and backwards, sideways, however it wants to, through time with absolutely no limitations. And that's actually one of the big challenges people have when they cross over to the other side, is realizing time moves differently and that they have a completely different perception of cause and effect. Now, this is where the soul exists. There is time, but that time is not bound by the experience of linear flow. Let me state that again somehow. Where the soul exists after we die, there is time. Time does exist. It is not an atemporal existence. That's left for another layer of existence. But where the soul exists, because there is time, it just has like this wide open vista of what time could be and what events could transpire to be. So it's not limited to it like our brains are. So now that we know this, what happens at the point of death? Well, the soul leaves the body and it's no longer bound by the limitations of the brain. It can now experience the entirety of its physical life as a single container of existence. We're going to call that the continuum of its life. And the soul experiences the continuum of its life all at once. And that can be a shock to some people. They experience their whole life as if it was like one blip, like one big moment, everything occurring continuously in a continuum. They could be in any moment, at any time, with anyone, just by observing it. Now, the body is resuscitated, the soul starts to come back into the body, and the brain, which wants a linear time experience, has to make sense of that non-linear time experience of the soul connecting with a continuum of life. And as the brain is turning this non-linear experience into a linear experience, you're going to interpret that as a life review, or as your whole life flashing before your eyes. And that's what's really going on, is you're moving from non-linear time into linear time. And so this experience really highlights the different ways that the brain and the soul experience their respective realities. Now, one of the commonalities about life review is that it comes with no judgments. Please be aware of this. This is really important to understand. There is no judging you for your life. There's not Anubis there with a feather and a scale. There's not St. Peter there with his big book of commandments demanding you. There's no supreme entity going, "Thou shalt not, but you did." That doesn't happen. There really is just understanding and acceptance. Now, there are those who want to say that hell is experiencing the pain and suffering that you caused others, and heaven is the experiencing of the joys that you had with others. And you know what? There is no doubt that there is a sense of connection and empathy that we do have with each other. We can feel each other's pains and joys. But please know that this afterlife is not a place of eternal codependency upon eternal judgment, really. I think it's time for us to evolve beyond those kind of concepts. You're not going to experience judgment and a sentence of an eternity of punishment. You're going to get beings who were with you your whole life, who understood why you made the choices you did, why you made the mistakes you did. And even at that moment in time of who you were, remember there's no linear time, they're going to be aware of that moment in time when you made those choices, why you made those choices. And so it's okay. It's okay to forgive yourself for that, because there's nothing to forgive. You did the best you could with what you had and who you were at the time. Who you are now may feel differently about that one. But when you get to this life review, when you get to see this continuum of your life, you'll remember why you did what you did and the effect that it had. And you can make different choices now going forward. And I think that's one of the best things that comes from the life review, is an understanding of who you were, an understanding of who you are, and an understanding of your own authenticity. And that you can choose to integrate all of that, becoming a whole being on a different level of existence than we can even understand here in the physical world. And that may be the true purpose of the life review, is to really experience the full authenticity of who you are and accept it and move on and grow and learn from that. Hail.